Hey guys, Lost Legacies channel welcomes you. Tonight we are going to drift back, further than records, further than kings, to a time when the world was a canvas and humanity was just learning how to hold the brush. Imagine, just for a moment, standing on a hill overlooking the sprawling, glittering lights of a modern city. The hum of traffic, the glow of a million windows, each a tiny world. Now imagine it all gone, replaced by forest, by swamp, by silent sleeping plains under a blanket of stars so bright they hurt your eyes. That silence, that untamed world, is where our story begins. It's a story of how we got from there to here, and a quiet warning that the journey back might be shorter than we think. Honestly, looking at the historical track record, you probably won't survive the full cycle. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm always curious where you're all listening from, so drop your city and local time in the comments below. It's fascinating to see our little community of night owls spread across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air is cold. That's the first thing you notice. Not just a mild chill, but a deep, damp cold that clings to your animal skin wrappings and makes the breath plume from your lips like smoke. You are crouched, muscles coiled, spear thrower resting in your hand. For days, your small band of about 30 people has been tracking a herd of wild horses, and your stomach is a hollow ache. This is your life. A life of constant motion, following the seasons, the animals, the ripening berries. Your home is a temporary shelter of branches and hides. Your world is the valley you're in, and your history is held in the stories told around a crackling fire. You know every rock, every bird call, every edible root in this territory. You are intelligent, skilled, and remarkably successful. For almost 200,000 years, this is how Homo sapiens have lived. It's a proven long-term survival strategy. Why would you ever change it? But something is changing. The great sheets of ice that have held the world in their grip for millennia are retreating. The air is warming, the rains are becoming more predictable. In a sweeping arc of land stretching from the Nile up through the Levant and down into Mesopotamia, a place we will one day call the Fertile Crescent, new kinds of plants are thriving. Wild grasses with heavy seed heads, ancestors of wheat and barley, are growing in thick, tempting stands. At first, you and your family just see it as another food source, a seasonal bonus. You gather the grains, parch them over the fire, and grind them between stones into a rough, nourishing flour. It's a lot of work for a little food, but it's reliable. Then you start to notice things. Where you spilled some grain near last season's camp, new shoots are coming up. You're not a botanist, you're just observant. You realize you can have some control over this process. So you start to experiment. You clear a small patch of land, scattering seeds deliberately. You pull up the weeds that compete with your chosen plants. You aren't thinking about the future, not really. You're just trying to make next season's gathering a little easier. You are, without any grand ambition, inventing agriculture. This slow, creeping change, starting around 10,000 BCE, is the single most important pivot in human history, the Neolithic Revolution. Historians still argue whether this was a brilliant leap forward or a trap we unwittingly set for ourselves. Was it a conscious choice for a better, more stable life? Or did growing populations and scarcer big game force your hand, pushing you into a life of backbreaking labor for a less nutritious diet? The skeletons from this period tell a tricky story. Early farmers were often shorter, sicker, and died younger than their hunter-gatherer cousins, their teeth worn down by the grit in their stone-ground bread. It seems trading the very diet of the wild for a bowl of porridge had its downsides. You've secured a food source, but you've also chained yourself to the land. The field must be sown, weeded, protected, and harvested. It's a relentless cycle. Your grand nomadic tour is over. Yet there was perhaps another force at play, something beyond mere subsistence. In modern-day Turkey, there's a place called Göbekli Tepe. It's a stunning complex of massive carved stone pillars arranged in circles, decorated with intricate reliefs of animals. The truly mind-bending thing about it is its age. It was built over 11,000 years ago, before the invention of pottery, writing, or even widespread agriculture. Hunter-gatherers built this. Imagine the effort. Quarrying multi-ton pillars with stone tools, moving them and erecting them. It suggests that the drive to come together for something bigger, for ritual, for community, for shared belief, may have come first. Perhaps the need to feed the hundreds of workers required for such a project is what kicked agriculture into high gear. Maybe it wasn't about filling your belly, but about feeding your soul. Whatever the reason, you've made your choice. You've traded your spear for a digging stick. Your family is no longer a wandering band, but part of a village. Your home is now a round hut, dug partly into the earth for insulation, its walls made of mud brick that you learned to bake in the sun. You have a storage pit for surplus grain, a revolutionary concept. For the first time, you have more stuff than you can comfortably carry. This brings a new kind of anxiety. That surplus is your security against a bad harvest, but it's also a temptation for others. You've just invented property, and with it, the potential for theft and conflict. Your neighbor's plot of land seems to be creeping an inch closer to yours every season. Get ready for the world's first homeowners association dispute. But as you sit at the entrance of your permanent home, watching your children play without the constant threat of a predator snatching them, you feel a new kind of security. The world is still dangerous, but the ground beneath your feet feels solid. You are no longer just a passenger on the earth. You are a settler. You've put down roots, and from these tiny, fragile roots, something enormous and complicated is about to grow. That solid ground beneath your feet feels good, but it's also demanding. Your small plot of land, watered by the heavens, is just enough for your family. But your village is growing. More mouths, more houses, more people staking claims on the earth. You quickly realize that the best land is near the river. The soil is richer, deeper. The problem is the river is a beast. You are no longer in the gentle hills of the pre-agricultural era. You've been drawn down into the great, flat, sun-baked valleys of the Nile, the Tigris and Euphrates, or the Indus. And here, water is everything. It is both your creator and your destroyer. In Mesopotamia, where you now find yourself, the spring floods of the Tigris and Euphrates are violent, unpredictable things, swollen with snowmelt from the distant mountains. They can arrive just as your young crops are taking root, wiping out a year's work in a muddy, churning torrent. Your first attempts to control it are small. You and your immediate neighbors pile up a low wall of earth, a levee, to protect your adjacent fields. It works for a season or two. But the river is powerful, and a small effort is no match for a big flood. One day, a respected elder, or maybe just the person with the loudest voice, gathers the village. The idea is simple, but transformative. If we all work together, we can build something bigger. A levee that protects everyone. A ditch that can catch the floodwater and carry it to fields further from the riverbank. You pick up your stone hoe and reed basket. The work is brutal. Under a punishing sun, you dig. You haul mud. You pack earth. For weeks, you work alongside people you barely know, your body aching, your skin cracking. It is the first great public works project. And it works. Your simple ditch becomes a canal. Your levee holds. For the first time, you have a degree of control over the water. You can divert it, store it, and release it when the rain-blasted summer has baked the soil into brick. The result is astonishing. The yield from your fields doubles, then triples. You have more grain than your family can possibly eat. This is the birth of surplus, and it changes everything. This breakthrough, the development of large-scale irrigation, is what turns your cluster of mud huts into a powerhouse. It allows the population to explode, and it fuels the rise of the world's first true cities, places like Uruk in Mesopotamia, sprawling and vibrant, humming with thousands of people. This newfound mastery of water brings with it a new set of problems. Your village upriver builds a new canal that takes a little too much water, leaving your fields dry. The first water rights dispute is born, and it's not settled with harsh words, but with clubs and spears. It becomes clear that managing the water requires managing the people. Someone needs to organize the labor to maintain the canals, to adjudicate disputes, to oversee the massive central granaries where the surplus is stored. This is where power begins to pool. Historians still argue whether the immense challenge of hydraulic engineering itself created the need for powerful, centralized governments, the so-called hydraulic empire theory, or if ambitious leaders simply used their control over the water supply as a tool to cement their authority. Either way, the person who controls the water now controls the food, and the person who controls the food controls you. In Egypt, the rhythm is different. The Nile is a far more benevolent master. Its summer flood is remarkably predictable, a slow, gentle inundation that blankets the valley in a fresh, life-giving layer of black silt. The Egyptians called their land Kemet, the Black Land, after this fertile gift. Their entire worldview was shaped by this cycle of renewal. To harness this gift, they became meticulous observers. Priests would watch the stars to predict the flood's arrival and measure its height using special stone staircases or wells called nilometers. These devices were crucial instruments of state power. The markings would tell them if the harvest would be bountiful or meager. A perfect flood of around 16 cubits meant prosperity. A low flood meant famine. A high flood was a catastrophe. Based on the priest's readings, the pharaoh's officials would calculate the taxes for the entire kingdom before a single seed was even sown. It was part science, part prophecy, and all business. The taxman, it seems, has always been with us. This difference in the rivers shaped the gods you worshipped. In Mesopotamia, your gods were capricious and demanding, like the rivers themselves. You lived in constant fear of their wrath, working tirelessly to appease them, never quite sure if you'd done enough. Your afterlife was envisioned as a gloomy, dusty underworld, a house of dust where you'd eat clay and drink dirt. Cheery stuff. You get the sense that after a life spent battling floods and salinization, they couldn't imagine an eternity of anything much better. The Egyptians, blessed by the gentle Nile, saw divinity in order, balance, and eternal cycles. Their gods were more reliable partners, and their afterlife was a continuation of the best parts of this one, a fertile field you could tend for eternity, provided you passed the final judgment. But whether your gods were angry or benevolent, the result of your labor is the same. The communal granary is overflowing. This wealth of stored food is the battery that powers civilization. It means that for the first time, not everyone has to be a farmer. A young woman with a knack for shaping clay can spend all her time making pots, trading them for grain. A man with strong arms can become a full-time soldier. Another with a clever mind can devote his life to studying the stars and appeasing the gods. You now have artisans, warriors, priests, and organizers. Society is stratifying. The communal effort of digging that first ditch has given rise to a complex machine of specialists, with an emerging class of managers firmly at the controls. Your world is no longer just the village, it is becoming a state. The granary is full, the canals are flowing, and your city is buzzing with a new kind of energy. But with this growth comes a creeping anxiety. In the old village, you knew everyone. You were bound by kinship and generations of mutual trust. Here in the sprawling labyrinth of Uruk or Memphis, you are surrounded by strangers. The old rules of family and tribe feel thin, stretched to their breaking point. What stops the man you buy your barley from cheating you? What makes the soldier from the other side of the city fight to defend your wall? Brute force can only go so far. You can't place a guard on every corner. To get thousands of people to cooperate, you need more than just a surplus of food. You need a surplus of belief. You need a story big enough for everyone to live inside. This is where your new leaders, the organizers and managers from before, perform their greatest trick. They don't just manage the grain, they start managing the heavens. At the very center of your city, a colossal new structure is being built, rising in steps toward the sky. It is the ziggurat, a man-made mountain of mud brick, and at its summit is the home of the city's patron god. This temple is not just a place of worship. It is the city's bank, its administrative center, its distribution hub. The priests who serve the god are not just mystics. They are astronomers tracking the seasons, scribes recording the flow of goods, and the ultimate authorities on, well, everything. When they tell you that the god Nana desires 1/10 of your barley harvest, you don't see it as a tax. You see it as a sacred offering to ensure that the moon god Nana continues to light the night sky and bless your city. It's the best deal you're going to get. At the same time, another kind of power is growing. The world outside your walls is still a dangerous place. Rival cities want your water, and nomadic raiders want your grain. In this chaos, a new figure emerges, the Lugal, the big man. He is a skilled warrior, a charismatic leader who can rally the city's men to fight. At first, his authority is temporary, granted for the duration of a crisis. But crises have a funny way of becoming permanent. The big man argues that to truly be safe, the city needs a standing army and a full-time commander. He builds a palace, separate from the temple, and soon his sons are inheriting his command. Secular power now has its own center of gravity. The true masterstroke of social engineering, the innovation that builds empires, is the fusion of these two powers. The king, the big man, forges an alliance with the temple. Or more brilliantly, he declares that he is the god's chosen representative on earth. His rule is not an accident of his own strength. It is a matter of divine will. To disobey the king is to defy the cosmic order. In Egypt, they take this a step further. The pharaoh is not merely the god's chosen, he is a god, a living, breathing horse on the throne. This is the invention of the divine right of kings, and it is an incredibly powerful piece of social software. It turns obedience from a calculation into a sacrament. Historians still argue whether early kingship grew out of the temple, with priests taking on secular roles, or if it was a hostile takeover, with military leaders usurping the temple's authority and co-opting its religious legitimacy. The evidence is murky, suggesting it likely happened both ways in different places. But the result was the same, a ruler who could command a level of loyalty and sacrifice that no village elder could ever dream of. This new myth creates a new expanded identity. You are no longer just a member of the clan of Ur-Nama. You are a Sumerian. You are a subject of the great king of Ur. This shared fiction allows you to trust and work with thousands of strangers, all of you bound by a common allegiance to the God King. This divine mandate comes with profound responsibilities, at least in theory. In Egypt, the pharaoh's job was to maintain Ma'at, the fundamental order of the universe, which encompassed truth, harmony, and justice. Ma'at was a goddess, a concept, and the law of creation all in one. If the pharaoh ruled justly and performed the correct rituals, Ma'at would prevail, the Nile would flood perfectly, the harvest would be rich, and the enemies of Egypt would be defeated. But if he faltered, he risked unleashing Isfet, or chaos. This provided a cosmic justification for his absolute power, but also made him accountable for everything from a bad harvest to a lost battle. It was the universe's most stressful performance review. So you pay your taxes in grain and labor, not just out of fear, but out of a sense of participation in this grand cosmic drama. Your small life has meaning in a way it never did before. When the king commands that a pyramid be built, you will haul stones under the desert sun. Not because you are a slave, most of the pyramid builders were free laborers, paid in bread and beer, but because you are building a stairway to the heavens for your God, ensuring the stability of the entire world. When he commands you to march to war, you go, believing you are fighting for your God and your civilization against the forces of chaos. The big man and the high priest have given you a story. It's a story that organizes your society, gives you purpose, and allows for cooperation on a scale that will change the face of the planet. And to manage this vast, complex new reality they have created, they will need a new tool. One that can conquer not just territory, but time and memory itself. Your God King sits on his throne, the embodiment of the state. Your city is a marvel of social organization, a machine for turning mud, water, and human labor into order and power. But this machine has a ghost in it, memory. Human memory is a flimsy, unreliable thing. You're now an administrator in the temple's treasury, and your head is pounding. Did the village of Girsu deliver its quota of 30 sheep, or was it 20? Was the ration for the coppersmiths 5 loaves of bread and 2 jars of beer, or was it the other way around? Multiply these questions by 1,000 every single day. The entire system, the entire shared reality you've built, is balanced on the fraying threads of what people can remember. As the scale of your civilization grows, this is no longer sustainable. You need a better brain, a permanent external one. The solution doesn't begin with an attempt to write poetry or history. It begins with counting. At first, you use a simple system of clay tokens. A small cone represents a measure of grain. A flat disc is a sheep. A sphere is a large vat of beer. When a farmer pays his tax, you place the corresponding tokens in a clay pot. It's a physical, tangible record. To create a contract or a bill of lading for a shipment, you place the tokens for the goods inside a hollow clay ball called a bulla and seal it. The recipient, upon receiving the goods, can break the bulla and check the tokens inside to ensure nothing went missing. It's a clever but clumsy security system. Then a stroke of genius. Some anonymous administrative genius, probably tired of making and breaking bullae all day, has an idea. Before sealing the ball, they press the tokens into the soft clay on the outside, creating impressions of the shapes within. Now you can read the contents without destroying the container. And from this, it is one short revolutionary leap to the next thought. If the marks are on the outside, why do you need the tokens on the inside at all? Why do you even need a ball? You can just take a flattened piece of clay, a tablet, and press the symbols directly into it. You have just invented the world's first document. The first things ever written are not epic poems or sacred laws, but receipts. 5 sheep, 10 jars of oil, barley quota received. It's the birth of writing, and it's gloriously, beautifully boring. These early marks were simple pictures, or pictograms. A drawing of a head meant person. A stalk of grain meant barley. But drawing pictures is slow. As the pace of administration quickens, you and your fellow scribes develop a shorthand. Using the wedge-shaped tip of a reed stylus, you simplify the pictures into abstract patterns of dashes and triangles. This is cuneiform, and it is the world's first true system of writing. Mastering it takes years of grueling training, but it makes you one of the most powerful people in the city. You are a scribe. You can read. You can write. You can command a technology that seems like magic to the 99% of the population who are illiterate. Literacy becomes the new key to power and social mobility. The implications of this invention are staggering. Writing annihilates distance and cheats death. Your king can now send a detailed, unambiguous order to a general 50 miles away, confident that his message will not be distorted by the messenger's faulty memory. A law once inscribed on a clay tablet and baked in the sun becomes permanent and impersonal. It applies to everyone, everywhere, forever. The state now has a long, infallible memory. It remembers every debt, every tax owed, every land transaction. For better and for worse, there is now a permanent record. Historians still argue whether this revolutionary technology was invented only once, in Mesopotamia, and then slowly spread and adapted across the globe, or if it sprang into being independently in Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China as each civilization reached a similar threshold of complexity. While born from the dry world of accounting, this new tool was quickly seized by the human spirit. The first author in history whose name we know was not a king or a warrior, but a woman named Enheduanna. She was the daughter of the great empire builder Sargon of Akkad, and she served as the high priestess of the moon god in the city of Ur. Around 2300 BCE, she composed a series of powerful, deeply personal hymns to the goddess Inanna. And at the end of her work, she signed her name. It was the first time an author stepped out from the cloak of anonymity to say, "I wrote this. This is my voice." She turned the tool of bureaucrats into a vehicle for art and self-expression. But for the state, its primary function remains control. You, the scribe, are the central gear in the imperial machine. You sit cross-legged in the palace courtyard, a wet clay tablet on your lap. You record the tribute coming in from a conquered city. You draft the orders for a new canal to be dug. You update the list of conscripts for the king's army. Your stylus moves with practiced speed, its wedges and lines giving permanent form to the king's will. With this simple tool, you can organize the labor of thousands, feed an entire city, and administer an empire. The shared story of gods and kings now has a script. And with this script, you are about to build things the world has never seen. With the power of writing, your civilization now has a permanent memory. With the power of divine kingship, it has a unified will. And with the power of irrigated agriculture, it has a massive surplus of energy in the form of food and human labor. The question that hangs in the air of the palace and the temple is, what do you do with it all? You can't just keep piling up grain forever. You have organized thousands of people into a single cohesive unit. You have convinced them of a shared purpose. Now you need to give that purpose a physical form. You need to build something that screams your power, your permanence, and your piety to the heavens. You are standing on a vast, sun-scorched plateau. The air is a haze of white limestone dust, and the noise is a deafening chorus of human effort. The sharp clink of copper chisels on stone, the deep thud of heavy wooden levers, and the rhythmic chanting of hundreds of men hauling on a thick rope. Before you, a mountain is rising. Not a natural mountain, but one of perfectly cut, impossibly heavy blocks of stone. This is the Giza Plateau, around 2560 BCE, and you are a laborer on the Great Pyramid of Khufu. You are not a slave, as a later, much later, Hollywood would have you believe. You are a conscripted worker, a farmer in your off-season, doing your national service. You are paid in bread, radishes, and a generous daily ration of beer, which serves as both hydration and your primary source of calories. It's the world's most intense team-building exercise. Why are you doing this? Why is the entire economic output of the most powerful kingdom on earth being funneled into this one geometrically perfect pile of rock? For the pharaoh, this pyramid is not a tomb. It is a resurrection machine, an engine of eternity. It is the physical apparatus that will transform him from his mortal form into an eternal being, an Akh, who will sail across the sky with the sun god Ra forever. And his eternal journey ensures the eternal stabilities of Egypt itself. Your backbreaking labor is not just for a king. It's an investment in cosmic order, a way of upholding Ma'at and keeping the forces of chaos at bay. The pyramid is a national project that binds every corner of the kingdom together in a single, colossal task, reinforcing your identity as an Egyptian. The logistics are the real wonder here. The sheer project management, orchestrated by scribes with their clay tablets and papyrus scrolls, is breathtaking. They track the thousands of workers, organized into gangs with competitive names like the Drunkards of Menkor. They manage the supply chains, bringing in granite from Aswan, 400 miles to the south, and fine white limestone from Tura across the river. They calculate the precise angles needed for the casing stones, achieving a level of precision that would be a challenge even today. The Great Pyramid, made of some 2.3 million blocks, would stand as the tallest man-made structure on Earth for more than 3,800 years. It is a monument not to alien visitors, but to the awesome power of human cooperation, bureaucracy, and a really good story. Historians still argue whether the massive blocks were dragged up a single, enormous straight ramp that grew with the pyramid, a series of smaller, zigzagging ramps on its faces, or a corkscrewing ramp that spiraled around the exterior. Each method presents its own set of mind-boggling challenges, and the Egyptians maddeningly left behind no blueprints. The monument speaks for itself, but it keeps its secrets. Of course, a structure filled with unimaginable treasure needed a security system. This is where the infamous Curse of the Pharaohs comes in. While the tales of a deadly mystical curse were largely a media frenzy following the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb in the 1920s, the tomb builders did employ some very real and very clever deterrents. They carved ominous inscriptions warning of the god's wrath, but the true curses were mechanical. They built confusing mazes of false passages, concealed hidden pits deep in the floor, and, as a final defense, designed massive granite portcullises, weighing many tons, to slide down and seal the burial chamber permanently. It was less about ancient magic and more about brutally effective engineering to thwart the tomb robbers who were a constant threat. Standing at the foot of the finished pyramid, clad in gleaming white limestone, its capstone perhaps sheathed in gold, you would have felt an overwhelming sense of awe. This was the power of your king, the power of your gods, the power of your civilization made manifest. It was a declaration in stone. In Mesopotamia, the ziggurats served a similar purpose, man-made mountains connecting the earthly plane to the divine. In Central America, the Maya would later build their own step pyramids as powerful stages for elaborate public rituals. All these structures were designed to make the individual feel small and the state feel eternal. They are the ultimate physical expression of the social order you've created, a ladder to the stars built on a foundation of surplus grain, divine authority, and meticulously kept records. Your society has demonstrated its power over stone, over labor, and over its own people. Now it will start to look beyond its borders. Your civilization is a triumph of order. The pyramids stand as silent testament to your power. Your granaries are full, and your king's authority is absolute. But as you look around the palace, you notice something. The grand roof beams of the temple are made of a dark, fragrant wood that doesn't grow in your sun-drenched river valley. The king's ceremonial dagger is not made of soft copper, but a hard, gleaming metal called bronze. The queen's necklace is a string of deep blue stones that seem to hold the night sky within them. Your civilization, for all its might, is not self-sufficient. It has an appetite for things it cannot produce, and to feed that appetite, you must look beyond your own borders. You must trade. You are now standing on the docks of a bustling port city on the Mediterranean coast. The air is thick with the smells of salt, cedarwood, spices, and dried fish. The shouts of sailors and merchants mingle in a dozen different languages. Here, goods from your home in Egypt, grain, gold, fine linen, and expertly crafted glass, are being loaded onto sturdy, single-masted ships. In return, you are taking on a cargo of immense cedar logs from the mountains of Lebanon, wine from the hills of Canaan, and olive oil from across the sea in Crete. This is the new engine of your world, not the river flood, but the sea lane, not the canal, but the caravan route. These networks become the arteries and veins of the ancient world, pumping not just goods, but lifeblood across vast distances. The demand for bronze alone transforms the geopolitical landscape. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, is the high-tech material of its day, essential for stronger tools and deadlier weapons. While copper is fairly common, tin is shockingly rare. The frantic search for it launches 1,000 expeditions and creates sprawling supply chains. Tin might be mined in the remote mountains of Afghanistan, loaded onto donkey caravans, journey across the arid plains of Persia to the cities of Mesopotamia, and from there be shipped to the wider world. Civilizations are now connected by invisible threads of dependency. Your army's strength is reliant on a metal that comes from a land you've never seen, controlled by people you don't know. Decades later, you might find yourself on the Royal Road, a marvel of Persian engineering. Established by Darius the Great, this highway stretches for more than 1,600 miles, connecting the far-flung corners of his massive empire. A system of relay stations, stocked with fresh horses and riders, allows royal messages to travel its entire length in about a week, a journey that would take you, on your merchant's mule, 3 grueling months. This is infrastructure as power. It allows the king to move armies, gather intelligence, and collect taxes with unprecedented speed and efficiency. The road isn't just for merchants, it's a tool for holding an empire together. Sometimes the past gives up its secrets in a single stunning snapshot. Off the coast of modern-day Turkey, divers discovered the wreck of a ship, now called the Uluburun shipwreck, that sank in the late 14th century BCE. Its cargo was a time capsule of Bronze Age trade. It held 10 tons of copper ingots from Cyprus, 1 ton of tin ingots from Central Asia, jars filled with exotic resins used for perfumes, logs of African ebony, elephant tusks, ostrich eggshells, Baltic amber, and a solid gold scarab bearing the name of the Egyptian queen Nefertiti. It was a floating warehouse of international luxury, proof of a vibrant, sophisticated, and deeply interconnected globalized economy, 3,000 years before the term was invented. But this interconnectedness is a double-edged sword. It brings prosperity and new technologies, but it also creates a new and dangerous fragility. Historians still argue whether the spectacular collapse of many of these great Bronze Age civilizations around 1200 BCE was caused by this very interdependence. The systems collapse theory suggests that these societies were like a complex house of cards. When one or two key trading partners were knocked out by invasion, famine, or internal rebellion, the disruption cascaded through the entire network. The supply of tin dried up. Weapons couldn't be forged. Economies cratered. The entire glittering edifice, built on the assumption of stable trade, came crashing down. More than just goods moved along these routes. You can't interact with another culture without being changed by it. New ideas travel with the caravans, hidden in the minds of merchants and travelers. The simple, elegant alphabet developed by the Phoenician traders spreads throughout the Mediterranean, eventually forming the basis for the Greek, Roman, and modern Western alphabets. Mesopotamian knowledge of astronomy and mathematics, developed to track the stars for their omens, becomes the foundation for Greek science. New gods and religious ideas find their way into foreign pantheons. These new ideas are a source of innovation and dynamism. But to a king who rules through a carefully controlled, divinely ordained story, a new idea can be the most dangerous contraband of all. Your world is now larger, richer, and more complex than ever before. But the threads that hold it together are stretched thin across deserts and seas, and you are beginning to feel the strain. The interconnected world you've built on trade is a world of opportunity, but also one of friction and rivalry. The king of the neighboring city-state has just slapped a heavy tariff on the tin caravans passing through his territory. The pirates from the coastal islands are preying on your grain ships. Your access to the resources that fuel your civilization feels fragile, dependent on the whims of others. In the palace, a new logic begins to take hold, a seductive whisper that says, why trade for what you can take? Why negotiate when you can command? The era of cooperative growth is slowly giving way to the age of conquest. The woolen tunic is scratchy against your skin, and the leather straps of your sandals are already starting to chafe, though the sun has barely risen. You are a soldier in the great army of the Assyrian king, a cog in the most terrifying military machine the world has yet seen. Your life is no longer governed by the seasons of the harvest, but by the relentless rhythm of the march. You are an instrument of the state's will, and its will is to expand. The official story, the one the priests tell, is that you are spreading the order of the god Asher, taming the chaotic lands of barbarians. The practical reality is that you are marching to seize the silver mines, the timber forests, and the trade crossroads of a rival kingdom. This shift to an imperial mindset sparks a ferocious arms race. The Hittites in Anatolia perfect the difficult art of iron smelting, and their tough, cheap iron weapons begin to outperform the bronze blades of their enemies. In response, you and your Assyrian comrades become masters of a different kind of technology, the science of the siege. You march with a corps of engineers who can construct massive siege towers that loom over city walls, and your ears ring with the percussive thump of iron-tipped battering rams splintering ancient gates. You are not just warriors. You are a mobile, disciplined force of destruction. The Assyrians in particular understood that the most effective weapon is terror. Your king's scribes produce detailed accounts of his campaigns, which are then carved into stone and displayed publicly. They are not tales of chivalry. They are chilling, calculated works of psychological warfare, boasting of pyramids of severed heads, of disobedient governors flayed alive, of entire populations deported and resettled, hundreds of miles from their homes. This brutality was not random, it was policy. It was a message to every other city in your path. Resist, and this will be your fate. Surrender, and you might be spared. Generations later, you might find yourself in a different uniform, part of a Roman legion on the misty frontier of Britannia. Your army is the heir to all this military evolution. It is a professional, standardized, and brutally efficient force. But as you stand watch on Hadrian's Wall, looking out over the gray, damp hills, you can feel the sheer, exhausting scale of what you are a part of. The Roman Empire at its peak stretched from the deserts of Mesopotamia to the shores of the Atlantic. To guard this immense frontier required a permanent, professional army of nearly 500,000 men. The cost of paying, feeding, and equipping this force was a constant, crushing weight on the imperial treasury. The very army that secured the empire was also slowly bleeding it dry. This is the great paradox of empire, the beginning of its internal decay, imperial overstretch. Conquest is expensive, but so is occupation. Every new province you conquer requires forts, roads, and a permanent garrison of soldiers who are no longer productive members of the economy. Taxes on the heartland rise higher and higher to pay for the defense of a distant frontier. Ambitious generals, commanding loyal legions thousands of miles from the capital, begin to realize that they hold the true power in the empire, leading to endless, debilitating civil wars. The glory of conquest has a very steep price. Historians still argue whether this process is a net benefit or a catastrophe for the conquered. For a provincial merchant living in Gaul, the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, brought an end to centuries of petty tribal warfare. It brought Roman law, a common currency, and magnificent infrastructure like roads and aqueducts. But this peace was bought at the price of a horrifically violent conquest, the enslavement of countless people, and the systemic extraction of wealth from the provinces to enrich the capital. Was it civilization or was it exploitation dressed up in a toga? The internal pressures of managing such a vast and violent enterprise required a fierce internal discipline. The Roman army, for instance, had a particularly brutal method for dealing with mutiny or cowardice known as decimation. If a cohort broke in battle, the survivors could be subjected to this punishment. The unit would be divided into groups of 10, and each group would draw lots. The one unlucky soldier would then be clubbed or stoned to death by his 9 comrades. It was a terrifyingly personal way of enforcing the idea that the unit was collectively responsible for its conduct, that failure by one meant potential death for all. From your lonely outpost on the wall, the map of your empire looks solid, permanent, eternal. But you can feel the strain. You can see the cracks. The glory of expansion has created a beast that is now devouring its own substance to survive. The challenge is no longer about conquering the world outside your borders, but about managing the vast, complex, and increasingly fragile world within them. You have an empire. On the map, its colored swathe is vast and reassuring. Its borders are defended by legions, its provinces are connected by roads, and its coffers are filled with tribute. But the greatest threat to its stability may not be the barbarian on the frontier, but the hungry, restless mob in the heart of your capital city. Rome, Alexandria, Babylon, these cities have swollen to unprecedented size, acting as magnets for the ambitious, the desperate, and the dispossessed from 1,000 different lands. Millions of people, disconnected from the soil and the traditions of their ancestors, are packed into a sprawling, volatile urban jungle. How do you keep the lid on this simmering pot? You learn the ancient playbook of social control. The first and most important rule is to keep them fed. A hungry mob is a revolutionary mob. You are now an official in Rome responsible for the cura and noni, the grain dole. This is not charity, it is state policy of the highest order. Every month, hundreds of thousands of registered male citizens are entitled to a quota of free or heavily subsidized grain. To make this possible, you are managing a logistical pipeline of staggering complexity. An entire fleet of grain ships sailing constantly from the fertile fields of Egypt and North Africa, the bread baskets of the empire, converges on the port of Ostia. From there, the grain is transferred to barges, hauled up the Tiber River, and stored in massive warehouses before being distributed. It is a welfare state on an epic scale, and its primary function is to prevent food riots. The emperor knows that his popularity and his very life depend on the smooth operation of your department. But a full belly is not enough. You also have to keep the people entertained, to distract them from the squalor of their daily lives and the powerlessness of their political situation. You give them spectacles. You give them the games. You are sitting now in the upper tiers of the Colosseum. The roar of 50,000 people is a physical force, a wave of sound that presses in on you. The air is hot and thick with the smells of sweat, cheap wine, yes, and something metallic. Blood. Below you, on the sand of the arena, two men in outlandish armor are circling each other. They are gladiators, and the crowd is screaming for one of them to kill the other. Historians still argue whether these brutal games were a sign of terminal moral decay or if they served a vital, if grim, social purpose. Were they just a cynical method for the emperor to curry favor with the masses, a bloody distraction? Or did they function as a kind of political theater, a place where the emperor could appear before his people, display his generosity, and reinforce the martial values upon which the empire was built? The violence was a ritualized display of Roman power over its enemies. Many gladiators were prisoners of war, and a stark lesson in the consequence of defying the state. Whatever the reason, the people loved it. For an even greater spectacle, you might go to the Circus Maximus, a colossal racetrack that could hold a quarter of the city's population. Here, the main event is the chariot races. You have placed your bets, and now you scream yourself hoarse for your chosen faction. The blues, the greens, the reds, or the whites. These were more than just sports teams. They were social phenomena, with fanatical followings that cut across class lines, and their rivalries could, and did, lead to bloody riots in the streets. And if the emperor really wanted to show off, he would stage a naumachia, a mock naval battle. This was the pinnacle of conspicuous consumption. An arena or even a specially dug lake would be flooded, and thousands of condemned criminals would be forced to reenact famous naval battles in custom-built warships, fighting to the death for the crowd's amusement. It was a stunningly expensive, almost absurd display of the state's ability to bend nature itself to its whim for the sake of entertainment. This two-pronged strategy of free food and spectacular entertainment, panem et circenses, or bread and circuses, as the poet Juvenal cynically called it, was the soft side of imperial control. The hard side was the law. Roman law was a sophisticated system for managing a multi-ethnic empire. But for the common person, its most visible aspect was its brutality. Justice was not equal. The wealthy and powerful, honestiores, faced fines or exile. The poor, humiliores, faced the mines, the beasts in the arena, or public execution by methods like crucifixion, a terrifying and agonizing spectacle designed to be the ultimate deterrent. This whole elaborate system of control is a masterful, if precarious, balancing act. It keeps the population of your capital fed, distracted, and fearful. But it is a deeply parasitic system. The grain is not grown in Italy, it is extracted from the provinces. The treasure that pays for the games is the spoils of conquest. The entire edifice depends on the continued functioning of the empire as a machine for extracting wealth from its peripheries and concentrating it in the center. It keeps the peace, but it drains the body politic. And it is entirely dependent on one thing the state cannot control: the predictable cooperation of nature itself. The system of bread and circuses is a marvel of social engineering, but it runs on a single fragile assumption that the harvest will never fail. Your empire, with its legions and its laws, its colossal cities and its intricate trade networks, is at its very core a biological entity. It is a vast, complex organism that must consume a staggering amount of food and water every single day. For all your philosophical and architectural sophistication, you are utterly dependent on a few inches of topsoil in the predictable rhythm of the rains. And the earth, you are about to learn, does not care about your empire. Nature is not bound by your treaties, nor is it intimidated by your gods. You are no longer in the sprawling cities of the old world. You are now in the dense, humid jungle of the Payton Basin in the heart of the Maya civilization around the year 850 CE. You are a farmer living in the shadow of the great city of Tikal. For generations, your people have been masters of this difficult environment. Your kings, the Divinajaw, are scholars of the cosmos. Their astronomers have calculated the movements of the stars with breathtaking accuracy. Their mathematicians invented the concept of zero, and their artists have filled the city plazas with intricate stone carvings that tell the stories of your gods and ancestors. From atop the steep limestone pyramids, your king mediates between your world and the supernatural realm, performing the sacred rituals that ensure the sun will rise and, most importantly, that the rains will come. But for several years now, the rains have not come. The sky remains a pale, hazy brass. The maize stalks in your field are withered and brown. The jungle, usually a riot of green, is brittle and silent. You walk into the city for the ceremonies, and you see the great central reservoirs, feats of engineering that once held millions of gallons of life-giving water, are now nothing but vast, cracked basins of mud. The king and his priests perform ever more elaborate, ever more desperate rituals on the pyramid tops. More incense is burned, more blood is let, but the sky gives back nothing. A quiet, terrifying question begins to spread among the people. If the king cannot make it rain, what good is the king? The divine contract is broken. The collapse of the classic Maya of the southern lowlands was one of the most dramatic societal failures in human history. For decades, a leading theory has been that they were victims of a series of intense, prolonged droughts. Evidence locked away in lakebed sediments and cave stalagmites shows a clear correlation between the period of abandonment of the great cities and a dramatic shift in the regional climate. This environmental shock didn't happen in a vacuum. It struck a civilization that was already straining at the seams, with high population densities, endemic warfare between rival city-states, and widespread deforestation for agriculture and the production of lime plaster for their temples. The drought was not the sole cause. It was the final merciless blow to an already stressed system. The people lost faith in their rulers and their gods and simply walked away. They abandoned their monumental cities, which were swiftly reclaimed by the jungle, leaving them as silent stone ghosts. Half a world away, and centuries later, a similar but even starker drama plays out on a tiny isolated speck of land in the Pacific, Easter Island, or Rapa Nui. You are one of the descendants of the first Polynesian settlers. Your people accomplished one of the greatest feats of open ocean navigation to find this place, and here they built a unique and remarkable culture, most famous for the colossal stone statues, the moai, that stand watch along the coastline. These statues, some weighing over 80 tons, were the ultimate expression of ancestral veneration and clan prestige. They were also, it turned out, the instruments of your doom. To move these giants from the quarry to their platforms, your people needed immense quantities of timber for sledges, levers, and rollers. Over generations, they cut down the island's great palm forests. They cleared more land for farming as the population grew. Slowly, inexorably, they stripped their world bare. The last tree fell. The consequences were catastrophic. Without wood, you can no longer build seaworthy canoes to hunt for porpoises and deep-sea fish. The now unprotected topsoil erodes from the hillsides, devastating your crop yields. Society turns on itself. A desperate competition for dwindling resources descends into chronic warfare. The oral traditions of your people speak of a dark time of decay, starvation, and even cannibalism. Historians still argue whether the story of Rapa Nui was a straightforward ecocide, a self-inflicted catastrophe, or a more complex decline exacerbated by factors like the introduction of crop-destroying rats and, eventually, contact with disease-bearing outsiders. But either way, the lesson is the same. The island was a closed system, a miniature Earth. Your people, trapped on their isolated paradise, failed to manage their resources and paid the ultimate price. Like the Maya, you learn that even the most ingenious culture cannot defy the fundamental laws of its environment. Your civilization has been built on the assumption of a stable and bountiful nature. But when that foundation cracks, an even more insidious, invisible enemy can pour through. The failure of the rains taught you that your civilization is at the mercy of the environment. The dying fields of the Maya and the barren hills of Rapa Nui are stark warnings that you can break the ecosystem upon which you depend. But there is another, more intimate enemy that your success has cultivated. The very things that define your civilization, your dense, teeming cities, and your far-flung trade routes, have created the perfect conditions for an invisible invasion, one that will kill more efficiently than any army. You have built a paradise for pestilence. For hundreds of thousands of years, your hunter-gatherer ancestors were largely safe from pandemics. Living in small mobile bands, they didn't create the concentration of hosts or the unsanitary conditions that epidemic diseases need to thrive. But you, civilized you, have chosen a different path. You live packed together in cities, a sea of humanity perfect for a pathogen to swim through. And you live in close daily contact with domesticated animals, cattle, pigs, birds, which are the ultimate source for many of humanity's deadliest plagues, like smallpox and measles. Your global trade network, the one that brings you tin and silk, is now a superhighway for these microscopic killers. A cough in a Syrian outpost can become a fever in Rome in a matter of weeks. You are in Rome around the year 166 CE. The empire is at its zenith, a period of unparalleled peace and prosperity. But a new kind of terror is silently creeping through the city's grand avenues and squalid alleyways. It begins with a fever, then a sore throat, a terrible thirst, and a dark eruptive rash. It is a disease the doctors have never seen, brought back by soldiers returning from a campaign in the Near East. We now call it the Antonine Plague. The city, once your source of security and opportunity, becomes a trap. The social fabric unravels with terrifying speed. People push carts piled high with the dead through the streets. The wealthy flee to their country estates, often carrying the disease with them. The poor are left to die in their crowded tenements. The sick are abandoned by their own families, for fear is now stronger than love. The gods, to whom 1,000 desperate prayers are offered, seem to have gone deaf. This plague burned through the Roman world for 15 years. It may have killed the Emperor Lucius Verus, and later his co-emperor, the philosopher king Marcus Aurelius. At its height, it killed a quarter to a third of the population in some areas, a death toll in the millions. It hollowed out the ranks of the legions, leaving the long frontiers dangerously undermanned. It devastated the agricultural workforce, leading to food shortages. It shattered the empire's tax base. The Antonine Plague is often seen as the brutal, bloody punctuation mark at the end of the Pax Romana. The Golden Age was over. Centuries later, after the Western Empire had fallen, your new home is Constantinople, the glittering capital of the surviving Eastern Roman Empire. The year is 541 CE, and the ambitious Emperor Justinian is on the verge of reconquering Italy and restoring the empire to its former glory. But an even more terrifying plague arrives, brought in on the very grain ships from Egypt that feed his capital. This is the first appearance of the bubonic plague. At its peak, it is killing 10,000 people a day in the city. The historian Procopius, who lived through it, wrote that the bodies became so numerous there was nowhere left to bury them, so they were stacked in the towers of the city walls. The plague of Justinian was apocalyptic. It may have killed 40% of the city's inhabitants and a quarter of the population of the entire Mediterranean world. Justinian's dream of a restored empire died with them. Historians still argue whether these devastating pandemics were the primary cause of Roman decline, or if they were simply accelerators of a fall that was already happening due to political and economic rot. Was the plague the killer blow, or did it just push over a structure that was already leaning? What is certain is that these invisible invaders landed on societies at their most vulnerable and exposed every weakness. In the face of such an inexplicable and unstoppable killer, people turned to any hope they could find. During the Antonine Plague, a famous charlatan named Alexander of Abonotakis made a fortune selling magical amulets that he claimed could ward off the pestilence. Each amulet was just a small cloth bag containing a single inscribed word. He was, in effect, selling a placebo to a dying world, a testament to the desperate power of hope in the face of overwhelming fear. But no magic could stop this. The plagues left your world depopulated, economically shattered, and psychologically scarred. The great empires, which had seemed so eternal, were now hollowed out from the inside, their foundations rotted by an enemy they could neither see nor fight. The great plagues have passed, but they have left your empire a ghost of its former self. The cities are emptier, the fields are fallow, and a deep, weary pessimism hangs in the air. The invisible invaders have exposed the fragility of your world, but the wounds that now begin to fester are self-inflicted. The external shocks of disease and climate change have weakened the body politic, allowing a sickness of the soul to take hold. The final chapters of your civilization's decline will not be written by a microbe or a drought, but by the familiar human poisons of greed, corruption, and political failure. You are a small landowner in Gaul during the late 3rd century CE. The grand idea of the Pax Romana is now a bitter joke. For as long as you can remember, the empire has been tearing itself apart in a near constant convulsion of civil war. This is the crisis of the 3rd century. Emperors no longer die of old age. They are butchered by their own troops, assassinated by rivals, or killed in yet another battle against yet another usurper. In the span of just 50 years, more than 24 men will claim the title of emperor. They are the barracks emperors, raised to power on the shields of their legions, and holding that power for, on average, just a couple of years before meeting a violent end. It's the world's most dangerous job promotion. For you, this political chaos is a relentless disaster. An army marches across your land, demanding your grain and livestock. It doesn't matter if it's the legitimate emperor's army or the usurpers. They both feed themselves with your future. Law and order have vanished. The roads are unsafe, plagued by bandits and deserters. You look at the coins the tax collector demands, and they feel light, tinny. To pay their ever-restless armies, the endless parade of short-lived emperors has been debasing the currency. They've been mixing more and more cheap metal into the silver denarius until it's little more than a bronze slug with a thin silver wash. This triggers runaway inflation. The money in your savings chest becomes worthless. You start to conduct business through barter, a few chickens for a new pair of sandals, just like your distant ancestors. The sophisticated market economy of the empire is grinding to a halt. As the economy crumbles, the state becomes more desperate and more predatory. The bureaucracy, itself a massive expense, sends out its tax collectors to squeeze blood from a stone. The crushing weight of taxation falls on the very people who produce the empire's wealth, farmers like you, merchants, artisans. The super-wealthy senatorial class often finds ways to evade these taxes, retreating to their enormous fortified country villas, which are becoming a kind of proto-feudal manor. They are checking out of the empire, creating their own private worlds of luxury while the public world collapses. This is where the foundation truly cracks. You begin to lose faith in the idea of Rome itself. Why should you sacrifice for a state that has become nothing more than a machine for your own exploitation? The old civic virtues, duty, honor, service to the state, seem like hollow words. This growing disillusionment creates a spiritual vacuum. The old pagan gods, who have so clearly failed to protect the empire from plague and civil war, lose their hold on the people's hearts. You see your neighbors turning to new faiths, mystery cults from the East, and especially to the strange, exclusive cult of the Christians, who speak of a heavenly kingdom that makes this crumbling earthly one seem irrelevant. Historians still argue whether the rise of Christianity was a cause of Rome's fall or a symptom of it. Did its focus on the afterlife, as some have claimed, fatally weaken the civic bonds and military spirit of the Roman world? Or was the empire already dying on its own, and Christianity simply provided a new, more resilient social structure? a network of bishops, a system of charity, a community of belief that could survive the collapse and ultimately preserve aspects of Roman civilization for a future age. As the state's grip weakens, some people take matters into their own hands. In the countryside of Gaul and Hispania, you hear whispers of the decode. They are bands of runaway peasants, army deserters, and escaped slaves who have had enough. They are more than just bandits. They are a full-blown social rebellion, fighting against the tax collectors and the landlords. They are trying to build a new society in the ruins of the old one. They are a clear and painful symptom of an empire that has lost the consent of the governed. Your civilization is now a hollow shell. The map still shows a single unified empire, but in reality, it is a fractured, impoverished, and deeply broken society held together by little more than inertia and fear. It is weak, rotten from the inside, and utterly unprepared for the final push that is about to come from beyond its frontiers. Your empire is a hollowed-out tree, still standing but rotten to the core. Its political institutions are paralyzed by infighting, its economy is in ruins, and its people have lost their faith in the old certainties. It has been weakened by drought, ravaged by plague, and bled dry by civil war. And now the outsiders are arriving. Not as a simple, savage horde, but as the final, complex chapter in a long story of decline. You are standing watch on a tower overlooking the Danube River, the long-established frontier of the Roman world. For generations, this river has been the line separating your civilization from the myriad of Germanic and Scythian peoples you lump together under the single, dismissive name, barbarians. The term simply means non-speaker, someone whose language sounds to you like an incomprehensible barbar. You've traded with them, fought them, and even hired them. Many of your army's best auxiliary troops are Goths or Franks, serving the empire for pay in the promise of land. They are a familiar part of your world. But now something is different. On the far bank, a vast, desperate multitude has gathered. An entire people, the Tervingi Goths, are pleading for permission to cross, seeking refuge from a new and terrifying enemy sweeping out of the east, the Huns. This is the great domino effect that will bring the Western Empire to its knees. The eruption of the nomadic Huns from the Central Asian steppes created a shockwave of displacement, pushing tribe after tribe westward against the Roman frontiers. Your empire, with its depleted legions and bankrupt treasury, is in no condition to handle the crisis. In 376 CE, the Goths are allowed to cross the river in what starts as a massive refugee resettlement program. But corrupt and cruel Roman officials bungle the operation badly, withholding food and exploiting the desperate people until their fear and misery boil over into open revolt. 2 years later, at the Battle of Adrianople, a massive Roman army, led by the Emperor Valens himself, confronts the rebellious Goths. You are not there, but the news that comes back is a staggering, world-altering shock. The invincible Roman legions are not just defeated, they are annihilated. The emperor is killed. It is a catastrophe on a scale not seen in centuries. The psychological blow is immense. It proves that the outsiders can defeat the best a Roman army can throw at them, and it leaves a large, well-armed, and justifiably angry Gothic army roaming freely inside the empire's borders, which they will never leave. Historians still argue whether to call this period the barbarian invasions or the migration period. The first label suggests a straightforward, hostile conquest. The second implies a more nuanced process, a mass movement of peoples, often seeking not to destroy the empire, but to find a secure place within it. The truth is a chaotic and violent mix of both. These groups were not trying to end civilization. They were drawn to its wealth and security, and were often fleeing worse horrors behind them. After Adrianople, the floodgates open. On a frozen New Year's Eve in 406 CE, a huge coalition of Vandals, Suebi and Alans, crosses the Rhine River into Gaul, all meeting little resistance. The Western Empire is now hemorrhaging provinces. But the most symbolic blow is yet to come. In 410 CE, a Visigothic army under the command of Alaric does the unthinkable. They march down the Italian peninsula and sack the city of Rome itself. For 800 years since its last sacking by the Gauls in its infancy, the Eternal City had been inviolate. Though the political capital had moved to Ravenna, Rome was still the symbolic heart of the entire Roman world. The news of its fall sent a tremor of disbelief and horror across the entire Mediterranean. There is a grimly comic story that illustrates just how detached the imperial court had become. When a frantic messenger reached the Emperor Honorius in the safe, marsh-bound fortress of Ravenna and cried out, "Rome has perished!" the emperor was apparently devastated. He thought the messenger was talking about his favorite pet chicken, which he had named Roma. Upon being told it was only the city that had fallen, he was greatly relieved. The story is almost certainly untrue, but its endurance speaks volumes about the perception of a ruling class that had become irrelevant to the fate of its own empire. The outsiders are no longer at the gates. They are in the house. They are carving out new kingdoms from the corpse of the old empire. The Vandals will take North Africa, the empire's breadbasket. The Visigoths will take Spain, the Franks will take Gaul, and the Angles and Saxons will move into Britain. The central authority of the Western Roman Empire has dissolved. The tree has finally fallen. The question now is, what is it like to live in the shadow of its collapse? The last Western Roman emperor, a young boy ironically named Romulus Augustulus, has been deposed. The year is 476 CE. There is no grand, cataclysmic battle, no final fiery apocalypse for the empire. It is simply over. A Germanic chieftain now rules Italy. But what does a fall like this actually feel like for the people living through it? It is not a sudden explosion, but a long, slow, and eerie silence. It is the sound of a complex machine grinding to a halt. You are living in a town in what used to be Roman Gaul. Your grandfather's grandfather could have told you stories of a world connected by paved roads, a world where a single currency was accepted from the misty hills of Britain to the dusty markets of Syria. That world is gone. The great system of trade that brought African red slip pottery, Spanish olive oil, and Egyptian grain to your town has vanished. The ships have stopped coming. The world has become local. Your horizon has shrunk to what you can see from the nearest hill. Your finest pot is a lumpy, crudely fired piece from the next village over. Life has become smaller, poorer, and infinitely more precarious. You now live in a drafty wooden house built inside the crumbling stone shell of what was once a grand public basilica. Goats graze where lawyers and merchants once argued. The magnificent mosaic floors are cracked and covered in mud. You and your neighbors are quietly quarrying the old amphitheater for stones to patch your own walls. This is the fate of the great Roman cities. Without the state to fund the grain dole and maintain the infrastructure, they begin to die. The aqueducts, those marvels of engineering that brought millions of gallons of fresh water into the city, are cut by invaders or simply fall into disrepair through neglect. The great public baths, the social heart of the Roman city, shut down. Without sanitation, the cities become even deadlier. From a teeming metropolis of over 1 million people, the city of Rome itself shrinks to a sparsely populated town of perhaps 20,000, its inhabitants clustered like mice in the immense skeleton of their ancestors' glory. With the collapse of the cities and the secular administration, the infrastructure of knowledge disintegrates. Reading and writing, once essential skills for commerce and government, become the rare and specialized craft of monks and priests. The great libraries are lost. The works of ancient science, philosophy, and history are no longer copied. Practical knowledge vanishes too. The formula for Roman concrete, a material so durable that structures like the Pantheon still stand today, is forgotten. The knowledge of how to build a hypocaust, the ingenious Roman system of underfloor central heating, is lost. For the next 1,000 years, the richest kings in your part of the world will live in the smoky, drafty halls, huddling around a central fire, with less comfort than a modest Roman merchant once took for granted. The lights are going out. Historians still argue whether this period should be called the Dark Ages. The term is loaded, suggesting a complete void of culture and intellect. Many scholars now reject it, pointing to the new and vibrant Germanic kingdoms that arose, the incredible artistic and scholarly achievements of Irish monasteries, And the fact that the lights never went out in the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire or the new and brilliant Islamic Caliphate. They prefer more neutral terms like late antiquity or the early Middle Ages, which acknowledge that this was not an end, but a messy and painful transformation. But for you, living in this transformed world, it feels dark. The past is a landscape of incomprehensible giants. You look at the solid straight road that runs near your village, impossibly straight, impossibly well made, and you have no idea how your ancestors built it. You look at the ruins of the aqueduct, and it seems like the work of magic, not men. A great forgetting has taken place. The world has become simpler, and in that simplicity, much has been lost. The great forgetting has taken place. The world has become a landscape of enigmatic ruins, and the lives of your ancestors seem as distant and grand as the lives of gods. The complex machinery of their civilization is broken, but a machine can be broken and its parts can still be salvaged. A civilization can fall, but its ideas, its language, its habits, and its ghosts can linger for 1,000 years. No civilization ever truly vanishes. It just becomes the soil for what comes next. You are living in that new world, centuries after the collapse. You think of the Romans as a long-dead people, a lost empire. Yet when you speak, you are unknowingly channeling their ghosts. The language you use to govern your new kingdom, to write your poetry, to haggle in the marketplace, is a strange, evolving dialect of what was once their tongue. The street Latin of soldiers and merchants, so despised by the high-minded orators of the Senate, has proven to be the empire's most durable legacy. It has survived the collapse and is now slowly, organically transforming to the new languages of your world: French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese. Even if you live in a land like Britain, whose new Germanic tongue seems utterly alien to Latin, your priests say Mass in it, your scholars write in it, and your king borrows its words to sound more sophisticated. The ghost of Rome is also in your laws. When your local lord attempts to settle a dispute, he may not know it, but the principles he is trying to apply, ideas about property, contracts, and evidence, are the faint, distorted echoes of Roman legal practice. In the great capital of the surviving Eastern Empire, Constantinople, the Emperor Justinian has ordered a massive compilation of all Roman law, the Corpus Juris Civilis. This book will be preserved, and centuries from now, when your descendants are trying to build more complex societies again, they will rediscover it. It will become the foundation of the legal systems for most of modern Europe. The gavel of a modern judge is in some ways still wielded by the spirit of a Roman magistrate. But the most important vessel of survival, the great ark that carried the memory of the ancient world through the flood of the collapse, was the Christian Church. It was a quirk of fate. The institution that many conservative Romans blamed for the empire's decline became its chief preserver. The church adopted the administrative geography of the empire with its dioceses and provinces. It made Latin its official language. And in its most remote and quiet corners, in monasteries perched on windswept islands or tucked away in secluded valleys, a new kind of work began. You are a monk in one of these monasteries. Your days are a quiet rhythm of prayer and labor. Your main task is to sit in the scriptorium, the copying room, and painstakingly transcribe ancient texts onto new parchment. You are mostly copying the Bible and the writings of the church fathers, but to understand these, you also need the old pagan grammars and texts. So you copy Virgil, Cicero, and Ovid. You might not approve of their pagan sentiments, but you preserve their words. Historians still argue whether this was a conscious, heroic effort to save knowledge, or if you were just a selective filter, saving what was useful to you and allowing thousands of other scientific and philosophical texts to perish. Either way, your quiet, anonymous labor is the fragile thread by which the classical world remains connected to the future. The physical legacy is all around you too. The great Roman roads, though now crumbling and beset by bandits, are still the best and often the only major routes in the land. Their engineering is so far beyond your current abilities that your people have started to say they were built by giants. It is the only explanation that makes sense. The ghost of a Roman engineer still dictates the path you walk. A civilization's greatest legacy is often the dream of itself. The idea of a single, universal, peaceful empire, the Pax Romana, haunts the imagination of the ambitious new kings of your world. Rulers like Charlemagne will call themselves Roman Emperor, attempting to resurrect the ghost and wrap themselves in its authority. It is a dream that will never fully die. It seems the lights did not go out completely. They were just carried into quiet rooms, tended by a few dedicated hands waiting for the dawn. The great structures fell, but the blueprints, though tattered and incomplete, were saved. And so, our long journey through time comes to an end. You are back where you started, in your own time, in a quiet, comfortable room. The ghosts of the past have receded, but they haven't left. They are encoded in the words you speak, the laws you live by, and most of all, in the deep, recurring patterns of the human story. The final lesson that these lost legacies offer is the most difficult one, the mirror they hold up to us. You are living in the most complex, technologically advanced, and interconnected civilization in human history. Your agricultural surplus, fueled by science and fossil fuels, could feed billions. Your cities dwarf Rome at its peak. Your written word is digital code, a language of pure logic that runs a global network of information. Your monuments are not pyramids of stone, but towers of glass and steel, and invisible satellites that orbit the Earth, whispering to the supercomputer in your pocket. By every measure of complexity and power, you are the apex of everything that has come before. And that should make you feel profoundly uneasy, because you have heard this story before. Our globalized economy, with its just-in-time supply chains that stretch across oceans, is the Bronze Age tin trade on an infinitely more complex and fragile scale. We have seen how a disruption in one part of that system, a pandemic, a war, a single ship stuck in a canal, can send shockwaves through the entire structure. We have learned that interconnectedness is both a great strength and a terrifying vulnerability. You can feel the strain of imperial overstretch, not just in one nation, but across the globe. You see the immense cost of maintaining military power and the widening corrosive gap between the hyper-wealthy and the rest of society, a gap that breeds the same kind of resentment and apathy that ate away at Rome's foundations. And the warnings from the natural world are no longer subtle. The Mayans faced a regional drought that lasted for decades. You are facing a planetary climate crisis that will last for centuries. The people of Rapa Nui deforested their island. You are degrading the ecosystems of an entire world. The wrath of nature, once a local and temporary disaster, now threatens to become a global and permanent condition. And as the recent pandemic so brutally reminded you, the invisible invaders are not a relic of the past. Your global travel networks are the most efficient vectors for disease that have ever existed. The most unsettling echo, perhaps, is in the decay of trust. You see the political polarization that tears at the civic fabric. You see the debasement of the currency, not in silver coins, but in the currency of information itself, where truth becomes hard to distinguish from propaganda and conspiracy. In this confusion, people lose faith in the institutions that are meant to hold society together, creating the same spiritual vacuum and cynical despair that pervaded the late Roman world. The concept of historical cycles, the rise and fall of civilizations, has been studied by historians for centuries. Historians still argue whether our global scientific civilization is somehow immune to these ancient rhythms. Are we different? Is our technology a shield that will protect us from the patterns that brought down every empire before us? Or does it simply mean that we have the capacity to fall from a much greater height? There is a group of scientists who maintain a symbolic clock, the doomsday clock. Each year they move its minute hand closer to or further from midnight, which represents global catastrophe. Originally created to warn of nuclear war, it now includes threats like climate change and pandemics. It is our modern version of the nilometer, a rational, scientific attempt to read the omens and gauge the prospects for the coming harvest. The fact that we feel the need for such a clock is perhaps the most telling sign of all. We are a civilization that is, for the first time, aware of its own fragility. And now the journey is over. The echoes of these fallen worlds begin to soften, fading back into the quiet of your room. The weight of these grand, sweeping cycles can feel heavy, but the story of humanity is not just one of collapse, but of incredible, stubborn resilience. It's a story of survival, of adaptation, of saving the embers of a fire when the great logs have burned away. These tales are not meant to fill your dreams with anxiety, but to frame your own fleeting moment with a deeper sense of perspective. The challenges are vast, but the human capacity for ingenuity and compassion is vast as well. So let the great sweep of history fall away now. Feel the stillness around you. Notice the gentle hum of the fan, the soft weight of your blanket. The past is a vast and profound ocean, but for tonight you are safe on the shore. Let the waves of sleep come and wash these ancient ghosts away, leaving only peace.